حضرت آیت الله العظما سید علی حسینی خامنه ای
A significant portion of Iran's defenses had been destroyed by stealth bombers and fighter fighters of the fifth generation that had been used by the United States. Iran had already been broken. The B-52 Stratofortress is about to make its debut at this point. Iran has just learned to fear this United States aircraft, which is 74 years old since it has just launched an attack on Iran that is historically badass. One thing that the B-52 is capable of doing exceptionally effectively is assisting a nation that has acquired air supremacy in completely destroying targets that are located on the ground. It is able to load up on precision-guided explosives that the United States can employ to destroy the remnants of Iran's defenses and military nodes. The bomber has a payload capacity of approximately 70,000 pounds, and it makes full use of that capacity. According to Max Afterburner, his investigation into the arrival of B-52s in Iran provides additional explanation. According to him, that is a powerful blow. In other words, the B-52 has the capacity to transport 70 JDAMs. When it comes to the amount of firepower that the B-52 can bring to the table, the number of JDAMs alone is sufficient to tell you everything you need to know. These guided air-to-surface missiles are available in 3 different weights: 500 pounds, 1,000 pounds, and 2,000 pounds. Assuming that Afterburner believes that the B-52s that are sent into Iran would most likely be carrying the 1,000-pound variety, we are making the assumption that this is the case. However, Afterburner also suggests that this may not be the greatest choice. There is a possibility that you could have a surface-to-air missile system that lights up and is capable of firing at a B-52 despite the fact that air superiority has now been established. When asked about the current situation in Iran, he provides insight. The air defenses of Iran have been completely destroyed, but they are not completely gone, as we will reveal in the next video. There is a high probability that the United States B-52s are flying in loaded with JASSMs, which stands for Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missiles, because these one-off strikes are a possibility. The United States B-52 bombers are able to take off and launch at targets from a distance thanks to these subsonic missiles, which can travel between 230 and 575 miles, depending on the model. This allows the bomber to remain well out of range of any paltry air defenses that Iran may still have. When we take this into consideration, we are brought back to the topic that we discussed previously, which is the work that the B-52s are conducting in Iran. By carrying out the covert and precise strikes, the United States B-2s were able to create an atmosphere in which the B-52s could operate with a reasonable degree of safety. As soon as the B-52s landed, they immediately began attacking everything that Iran still possessed until they were destroyed. Furthermore, according to Afterburner, the primary target of the older United States bombers at the moment is on the command and control nodes, also known as C2 nodes, which are utilized by the remnants of Iran's military in order to coordinate their defense. Afterburner argues that Iran's coordination is probably coming apart by the minute as he discusses the targets that the United States B-52s are aiming for. As soon as one of those command nodes is taken down, their launchers become isolated, their reloads become extremely delayed, and their production facilities are also affected. As a result, their rebuild timeframes are pretty much non-existent at this point. To put it another way, the B-52s are going to destroy the very nodes that enable Iran to wave the one huge stick that it has standing in front of the United States of America. which is ballistic missiles. In a moment, we will return to the current situation on the Iranian missile front. What is happening? First, the war zone, also known as TWZ, is in agreement with Afterburner that the B-52s of the United States are inflicting havoc on the C2 nodes of Iran. This article contains statements made by Air Force General Dan Kane, who asserts that Iran's C2 structures are in a precarious state and that the transition from precision to power is a contributing factor in this development. According to Kane, the Central Command is currently transitioning from huge, deliberate strike packages that use standoff weapons at a range that is beyond the ability of an adversary to shoot at us to stand-in precision strikes that are being carried out over Iran. This move is taking place on day 4. Therefore, perhaps it would be more correct to state that the next phase is one of accuracy and power. Regardless, Iran is experiencing a great deal of suffering as a result of the arrival of the B-52, since the consequences are already staggering. This is evident from the strike counts alone, as we can see. Following the initial 24-hour wave of 1,000 strikes, the United States of America and Israel have increased the number of strikes they have carried out. Over the course of the first 3 days of the conflict, the two allies had worked together to destroy 2,000 targets located within Iran. Because they shoot standoff munitions at targets that are no longer fully guarded by an Iranian air defense network that was significantly weaker than it should have been from the beginning. B-52s will have played a significant role in this escalation. The B-52s are destroying everything in their path, and Tehran is well aware that the battle is over from their perspective. This is an outstanding example of American ingenuity. It demonstrates that the United States is making preparations for a long-term strategy to permanently remove Iran's regime. The Iranian Ministry of Health has stated that, as of March 4th, 920 people have been killed, although it is not known if these individuals are civilians or members of the military. This information was reported by PBS News. According to other estimates, such as those that were reported by the Jerusalem Post, more than 1,000 members of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps were killed during the initial wave of attacks. Therefore, it is reasonable to infer that even more members of the Guard Corps have been eliminated now that the B-52s from the United States have entered the conflict. It is a force that causes destruction. Nonetheless, the introduction of American bombers had a significant impact on the defensive front, which was possibly the most significant consequence. It was previously mentioned to you that the United States B-52s appear to be primarily aiming their attacks at Iran's C2 nodes. In the event of a land war, these nodes would play a crucial role in coordinating the logistics and the soldiers. The stockpile of ballistic missiles that Iran possesses is the most significant weapon that it possesses in this conflict, as was noted earlier. This is not a land war. Iran Watch reports that before to the year 2022, the United States Central Command CENTCOM assessed that this stockpile contained more than 3,000 missiles alone. In the course of its attacks on Israel and the military bases of the United States, both before and during the battle that is currently taking place, Iran has most certainly used up a significant portion of that stockpile. According to estimates provided by the Israel Defense Forces before the commencement of the conflict, Iran possessed approximately 2,500 missiles. On the other hand, it is a lot. In addition, Iran is not making the most of these stockpiles because of the B-52s that are owned by the United States. The elimination of C2 nodes indicates that Iran will be unable to coordinate the launch of its missiles. When this is combined with other attacks that are directed at the missile launch facilities of Iran, the result is the crippling of the one piece of power that Iran is able to project. This is something that is reflected in the numbers. More statements made by Kane were reported on by CNN in an article that was published on March 4th. These comments highlighted that Iran's ballistic missiles are gradually being removed from the picture. Even as of this morning, the United States Central Command is making consistent headway. Kane stated in a brief statement that was presented to the Pentagon that Iran's theater ballistic missile shots have decreased by 86% since the first day of battle with the United States. He also mentioned that there has been a decline of 23% in just the past 24 hours. Not only that, but Iran's unidirectional attack drones have been destroyed by a whopping 73% of the time. What we are witnessing here is the gradual reduction of Iran's overall military strategy, and the B-52s that have recently landed in the nation are playing a significant role in this process. However, you might recall that we mentioned earlier in the movie that the United States' decision to send in the B-52s was a brilliant move on their part. Although it is obviously helpful, the annihilation of Iran's offensive capacity is not the reason why this occurrence occurred. There is yet another explanation. On a weekly basis, we break it out according to this format. Why is it that the United States of America made such a brilliant decision to bring in the B-52s when President Donald Trump of the United States of America offered us a hint on March 2nd? He indicated that the battle with Iran could last for a significantly longer period of time than some people might imagine. The United States has estimated that the fight will last between 4 and 5 weeks. However, President Trump has stated that the United States military is capable of continuing for a long period of time. In other words, the United States is already operating under the assumption that the fight will go for several weeks. Also keep in mind that we are still in the first week. Stay here with us if you are interested in learning more about this brilliant move by staying with us. In the first place, the most recent significant news regarding the conflict in Iran is the arrival of the B-52s. Now that the big, ugly, and obese guy is flying above Iran with almost complete impunity, it is a clear indication that the air defenses of the Tehran regime have been destroyed and that they are unable to do anything to prevent the United States from using one of their older bombers that is not stealthy to cause even more damage. A further point to consider is that the United States of America needs to prepare for the likelihood that the conflict could last even longer, which is a very significant item. While simultaneously pounding Iran with as much weapons as it can manage, the United States must concentrate on bringing costs down. And it is precisely at this point that the brilliant decision to employ the B-52s, rather than continuing to use the more recent and stealthier B-2s, comes into a play. Even though it is tempting to think of the United States military as an overwhelming monster that has an endless bankroll, the government nevertheless wants to make sure that it is not spending money where it is not required to, so that it may avoid unnecessary expenditures. By continuing to employ the B-2 for bombing runs, the United States could have been wasting money in the extended conflict that it believes the Iran war will become. This is one of the ways that the United States could have found itself in this situation. When discussing why the B-52s have entered the scene, 1945 summarizes it by stating that the B-52 is capable of carrying enormous amounts of precision-guided munitions, that it has a long loiter period, and that it costs less per hour to operate than the B-2. When the skies are favorable, the B-52 is ideally suited for continuous bombardment, which is its primary function. The skies over Iran are currently in a permissive state, which is absolutely correct. Wyon argues that the B-2 costs approximately twice as much as the B-52 simply to get into the air. This is relevant to the cost of the aircraft. The B-2 bomber is best suited to the shock and awe method of the initial surgical attacks that we have seen in Iran. After that, it withdraws and allows other bombers to enter the conflict. This is because the B-2's stealth coatings and high maintenance make it the bomber that is best suited to this approach. One must also take into consideration the direct cost issue, which is of utmost importance. The construction of a single B-2 aircraft in the United States costs approximately $2 billion. In the event that one of them is destroyed or fails to work properly while flying over Iran, this would result in a significant hole being made in the budget that the United States has planned for its war against Iran. Compare this to the B-52 aircraft. As part of a program that will cost $48.6 billion and is meant to keep these elderly aircraft in the air until 2060, the United States has been refurbishing its B-52 bombers. There will be a total expenditure of $15 billion by the year 2021. There are now 76 B-52s in service with the United States of America. Even after that overhaul, it is estimated that it will cost approximately $640 million each unit. This is in addition to the cost of constructing the bomber more than 7 decades ago, which according to IG.Space amounted to almost $1.14 billion when adjusted for inflation. Less risk is what you get as a result of this. The loss of a B-52 is still a costly event, but it is not even close to being as costly as the loss of a B-2, which is significantly more expensive and technologically advanced. Additionally, there are the operating expenses that were discussed earlier. It has been reported by the national interest that the cost of a B-2 bomber is approximately $200,000 per flight hour. The B-2S that the United States of America dispatched into Iran as part of the surgical component of its strike strategy remained in the air for well over 30 hours, as we noted before. That is an expenditure that is currently over $6 million. On the other hand, the B-52 airliner has an hourly rate of almost $70,000 to fly. In accordance with what Wyon stated, this is around half of what the B-2 costs, even after taking inflation into account. The decision to switch to B-52 bombers was a brilliant maneuver from a purely financial point of view. The United States is able to continue to unleash massive levels of firepower on Iran by utilizing some of the most cutting-edge armaments, and it does so with a bomber that lays a substantially smaller financial burden on the United States' defense budget. In the event that the Trump administration is planning on running a campaign that is prolonged, even if it is only for 4 to 5 weeks, this switch was essential in order to guarantee that the campaign could continue. In light of everything that has transpired, we are currently in the current state of affairs. Iran is not living in a healthy state. Please consider it in this manner. The doors are opened by the United States B-2S with assistance from dozens of fighter jets from both the United States and Israel. Now that the B-52s have landed, they are immediately destroying any remaining military nodes in Iran by inflicting massive amounts of damage on them. We have already addressed a few aspects of that, particularly with regard to the ballistic missile front and the current level of Iran's air defenses. Nonetheless, it is worthwhile to delve a little deeper into the latter subject. Iran's integrated air defense system is not even close to being as advanced as the systems of Western nations, according to Afterburner, which describes what Iran had even before the bombs began flying. The Chinese surface-to-air missiles and radars, as well as the Russian surface-to-air missiles and radars, have been utterly destroyed by these B-52s and other bombers, as we have witnessed. Prior to the beginning of the conflict, Iran was already in a position where it was losing the game of air defense. A further explanation is provided by Army Technology in a post published on March 3rd. In this piece, the author emphasizes how the air defenses that Iran possesses are not necessarily the Chinese and Russian units that Afterburner highlights. Iran is in possession of some of them, but a significant portion of its air defense network is comprised of low-cost imitations of the Russian S-300 and the Chinese HQ-7. Iran has reverse-engineered these two types of aircraft into its own versions, which have not been tested in battle up until this point. After being put through their paces, these imitations have been discovered to be lacking in quality. In addition, the reliance on reverse engineering without any innovation means that the systems that Iran developed for itself are susceptible to the same vulnerabilities as the systems on which they are based. An example of this would be the fact that Iranian copycats of the S-300 are susceptible to Israeli weapons such as the icebreaker missile. These missiles are designed to exploit the electronic warfare weaknesses of the radars that are utilized for the S-300 systems. Iran is currently paying the price for its failure to improve the security of its versions of the Russian and Chinese systems that it has copied. Iran did not take any action to address these vulnerabilities. The poor air defense network that Iran already possessed has become even more vulnerable as a result of the current scenario. As a result of the country's anticipation of additional strikes coming from the western direction, Newsweek reports that the nation has most likely begun transferring its air defenses from the east to the west. Nevertheless, that is not precisely a move of power. What this essentially means is that the eastern region of Iran is transformed into land that the United States B-52s can use to launch their standoff munitions from the side of the country that Iran does not guard. It is possible that Tehran and Isfahan have improved their security in comparison to what it was before the initial wave of strikes. But this improvement is not sufficient to prevent the United States and Israel from carrying out their respective attacks. According to Afterburner, the most likely scenario is that Iran would revert to the strategy of hoping that it will be fortunate enough to receive an occasional strike that is triggered by the complacency of the United States. That is not a tactic for attacking the airspace. A bet that does not even come close to having the payout that Iran requires it to have is being taken here. The United States of America have perfect air superiority. However, this does not imply that it possesses air supremacy, which is the state of being able to operate in the airspace of an adversary with complete assurance that it would not be challenged by any other armed forces. However, it is as close to establishing that supremacy as it needs to be in order to begin deploying bombers that are not stealth technology into Iran. This is a symbol of American confidence that Iran did not want to see at all, since it indicates that Trump is not lying when he says that he anticipated this campaign going on for several weeks. Iran was really concerned about this. Even without taking into account the carrier groups that the United States of America has operating in the Persian Gulf region, as well as the dozens of fighter jets and supporting aircraft that they bring to the equation, the United States B-52 fleet is going to be responsible for a significant number of additional strikes. On the other hand, the scope of the war broadens as the next events unfold. According to Afterburner, the arrival of B-52s signifies a clear change toward even higher volume and persistence in the campaign. This indicates that it is already headed in that direction within Iran itself. However, the scope is expanding in terms of the locations where the United States is carrying out strikes and the possible next steps that it may be preparing. An example of this would be the United States of America torpedoing the Irish Dana in international seas off the southern coast of Sri Lanka on March 4th. This is a significant distance from the Persian Gulf, and it indicates that the United States is broadening the scope of its attacks to include military assets that Iran has stationed outside of its own borders. There is also the possibility that the United States will send troops to Iran, which is a looming possibility. In order for the United States to achieve its objective of overthrowing Iran's government, Chatham House believes that this will be necessary. At this very moment, we are witnessing a shift away from surgical efficiency and toward complete and utter violent force. following the United States and Israel's launch of an insane 1,000 strikes against Iran's defenses within the first 24 hours of this new battle. It may appear unusual to say something like that. Those attacks, on the other hand, were surgical in nature. The idea that Trump has of assisting the Iranian people in regaining their independence and overthrowing the theocracy sounds more like a hopeful plan than a practical approach. According to the theory put up by the research tank, there are currently no indications of any meaningful domestic opposition or of defections from the regime. In addition, if this is the case, it indicates that the Iranian people do not have the necessary trust in their own capabilities to bring down the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the senior leadership that is still in place in Iran. As a result, we are now presented with an intriguing possibility. It is possible that the arrival of the B-52s and what appears to be weeks of relentless bombing are preparing the groundwork for a third phase of the Iran conflict. After the operation, the sledgehammer was used to break the bone. Immediately after that, it is possible that the Iranian regime would be overrun by American soldiers, who will then move on to the ground territory. One thing that we are confident of is that Iran's regime has been shaken to its very foundation, and it is possible that it will never fully recover. Without a doubt, this is a piece of bad news for the regime. Putin, on the other hand, has been betting on the growth of the alliance between Russia and Iran in order to portray himself as a global geopolitical actor. This is a devastating piece of news for Putin. Putin will suffer a significant setback in the event that the Iranian regime is overthrown, and you will learn the reason for this by watching our movie. Also, I am grateful that you watched. They were preceded by cyber activities, which included the obstruction of Iran's radar networks and the use of spoofing techniques. After communications were broken, the initial wave of strikes from the United States and Israel began to arrive. Air defenses were completely destroyed. There was a destruction of both naval and airborne assets. There were decapitation strikes that were carried out with the primary target being the leaders of Iran, including the supreme leader Ali Khamenei, who has since passed away. During those first 24 hours, Iran was confronted with a tremendous inferno that was more precise than anything Iranians had anticipated. What Iran did not anticipate, however, was that the United States was merely preparing the groundwork for the coming of something even more significant. Following the completion of the surgical procedure, the United States is now applying sledgehammer blows to the wounds, and Iran is unable to stop them. Currently, the B-52s have arrived, and in just a moment, we are going to provide you with specific information regarding their activities in Iran. In the meantime, let's take a brief look at the amount of strength that the most recent additions to the Iranian theater bring to the table. It is important to note that the B-52 is not a stealth bomber in contrast to the B-2, which has previously been observed conducting bombing runs over Iran that last for more than 30 hours. To put it another way, it is not able to circumvent